Making games is easier than you think, but the majority of people who want to start never do because they're afraid to learn to code. And tutorials are daunting and confusing. So today I'm going to show you everything you need to know to make your first game in one video so that you can stop getting overwhelmed by tutorials and quitting and restarting over and over again and finally focus on finishing and releasing games. And ultimately, the only way to do that is going to be to practice. So go down into the description and join the Yurikame Game Jam, which is coming up very soon, where you'll have the chance to put everything you're going to learn in this video into practice and make a game in just 3 days. Now, let's get started. So there are 3 levels to game development, and a lot of people jump into level 3 right away. They have this big game idea. If you haven't started at level 1, you're going to be totally lost in level 3. The very first step before we even touch our game engine is to do the game design. Game design at level 1 is usually just to copy a game that you already like, that already exists, or maybe that you don't like. Something like Pong or Flappy Bird. Or you can go on itch.io, find a game jam game that you know was only made in a weekend. In my case, I'm just going to make a very simple top-down shooter. Now, once you have your game design figured out, you have to write down everything that you're going to implement. This is called your development plan or your schedule. Okay, so I have my Google Doc open, and I'm just going to start writing down the features of my game. So I know it's a top-down shooter. WASD, player movement, and shoot. Enemies run towards me. It's important to start simple because there's a lot of things that you're going to overlook. There's a lot of things that I haven't written in here. For example, do the enemies have health? Do I just shoot them and they explode or something? How big are the levels? Are enemies just going a straight line, or is there obstacles that they're going to need to navigate around? Another detail that you're only going to notice when you actually develop and test your game is that when your player shoots, he's going to be able to just shoot over and over and over again super quickly. But okay, so with that done, we're going to move into the engine. So our game design and our game development plan is basically done for our level 1 game. You don't necessarily know what is simple when you're making your first game, which is why you should copy another game for now. Now, a lot of people are going to wonder, what engine should we even choose? And I don't even want you to ask that question at level 1. Just get Unity, make a new Unity project. It is an important question, but I don't want you getting caught up with the analysis paralysis of which engine should I choose, which is going to stop you from actually making your game. Now that I have Unity open, I'm actually going to focus on the art before I focus on the implementation. The way that a Unity game works is it's made up of game objects. Up here you have this game objects tab. You can create various objects in it. We're just making a 2D game for this. So let's create some sprites. I need a circle and I need a square. And you see we have a few different tools here in the engine. We have the square tool, which kind of lets you do anything you want with your sprites. You can stretch them. You can also do this rotate. You can rotate them and you can scale them. Now you also have a camera, and the camera will show you the sort of boundary of where your game's frame is. I couldn't see the boundary because I need to turn on this gizmos button. In the context of the Yurikame Game Jam, if you're participating in that, which you definitely should, you should be practicing, we're going to be only using art assets that we create in the engine, which means I can only work with these squares and circles and whatever other shapes are in here, but I cannot go into some other program, and you should be doing this for your level 1 game as well. Let's arrange a sort of bounding area for our game here. There you go. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then we're going to have spheres for enemies. We need to make this look pretty. We need to make it look good. And we're also probably we need one more game object. We're gonna need ammunition. At level 1, you're only building good art habits. You're only focusing on the foundational art principles. Color theory. There's also composition, but we're not too worried about composition in level 1. So to create color in your game, go into this folder section, the project section, create material. Materials in Unity are, and in pretty much any game engine, are what gives an object its appearance. We're going to create a new material. We need one material for every different color that we're going to be using. We'll do this player color, enemy color, and one more for bullet color. Now, just a quick thing, in Unity, these are not actually set up to be 2D. So we have to change this, this shader up here to be sprites default, and we're going to do that for every single one. All right, so now if I change the color of our wall texture just to something random, and I put this on the wall, there you go. We now have a wall that has some sort of color. Now we also need a background color. The background color is actually in your camera, so if we go back to the inspector, there's background. We can change this to anything we want, and for now we'll change it to some random color as well. Now, is this good? Is this in any way at all a good color scheme? I can barely see the enemy. You could argue that it looks okay, but it really doesn't. So how do you figure out what color your game should have? This is a color wheel. This is exactly what you're going to use to create your color palette. Over here, we're going to go into complementary. As you can see that each of these colors has a little bit of a different aspect to them. A color can be darker or lighter, saturated or desaturated, which means more colorful or more gray. And a color can have a hue, which is just whether it's red, green, blue, the kind of base color. So for our color scheme, scheme, we're going to go with something super duper simple. We're going to go with a good old blue and red, or blue and orange. One principle of color theory is that the things that are more in the front or in the foreground are going to be more saturated than the things that are in the background. So background elements should be more gray and not stand out so much. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this gray color for our background right away. Go back into Unity, copy that, and go into the camera, background color, give it that code that we copied, and there is our color. It's very similar to the original background color. All right, now for the walls, I'm going to take this one, and as you can see, every single thing I'm doing, every aspect of the game is going to be mostly one color of different shades and different saturations, and then the more focused elements are going to be a different color. All right, so it's slightly more saturated. Now, that doesn't stand out quite enough to me. Just tweak that just a little bit to make it more visible. Now what about the player? Well, the player is going to be our main saturated color. That's just not quite standing out to me enough, and I'm gonna just make him just adjust his hue a little bit. We shouldn't do this too much, but we gotta use it a little bit, and then we're going to make him lighter. So now our player actually stands out pretty well. Enemies are going to be this orange color, and our bullets should also be that color, but we're going to make it lighter. Okay, so now we have a more consistent color scheme, but a color scheme isn't enough to make good art. We're going to make some more objects here just to add a little bit of detail. We're going to make a crate. So I'm going to create a cube or a square, and I'm going to just give it a new material. I'm going to give it that same color, but this time we're going to desaturate it. Now I can make some changes here. I'm not going to be too precise. I'm just duplicating it with Control-C, Control-V. And now we're going to create a new material, create color 2. So I've applied the material to all of these square details, but we have this problem where it's not visible at all because the details are actually behind the square. To change this, because we're in 2D, we'll go here into the position, and we'll just reduce the Z position, decrease it a little bit, and now it's in front. I'm going to put the crate in these corners here, and you'll see that it's a background element, but it's using the opposite color in our color scheme, but it's desaturated. So it's technically the same color as the enemy, only a little bit more gray. At level 1, this is all the art we need to do. Now, how do we turn this visual prototype into an actual game? We are going to need to learn a little bit more about how the engine works. This is where programming comes in, and this is where the vast majority of new game developers outright quit because they don't understand why the instructor is making the choices he's making, and they feel like he's just not explaining what he's doing. So how do you learn programming as a level 1 game developer? Like I said at the beginning of this, the idea behind level 1 is that you're just copying games that already exist, and one of the best ways to do that is to follow tutorials. So how do you go about this without feeling completely lost? Well, I want to give you an analogy that I think is going to explain it a little bit better. Imagine you're playing Minecraft and you jump onto someone's world or onto a server, and they have this like automatic farm set up, and it's really complicated, and you look at it and you think, that must have taken you a long time, that's very complicated, but you kind of understand at least the basics of how it was done. You know they used redstone, you know they probably used pistons, you know items will flow into water, they probably use hoppers. You don't necessarily know the process, but you know the tools that they use because you know the world. So in game development, you have to learn those tools before you can understand the choices that people make in tutorials. So that's why at level 1, all I want you to do is copy tutorials, but you're not just going to copy them. I'm going to show you how to use tutorials the right way by stepping into the shoes of a level 1 game developer, and I'm just going to implement the top-down shooter using only a tutorial. So I found this Brackeys tutorial, and I'm just going to be following along with this. However, I'm also going to open up a new Google Doc. I'm just going to make a list of things that I'm going to try to remember for later that I can then apply once I learn programming. And we're going to learn programming in level 2. We're not learning programming at level 1 because at level 1 your priority is to finish and release games fast. So let's get started with this. Mentioned variables. I have no idea what a variable is. He said float. There's another one. He just referenced rigid body component. Apparently we need 2 different functions. Okay, why? Input.getAccessRaw. What is all this? Okay, let me see if that works for me. Why doesn't it work? Wait a second, I have an error. Okay, what's this? It says the variable RB of player movement has not been assigned. Did I forget something? What did I forget? Oh, right, he has this rigid body 2D component. It's going to take you a little bit slower to realize that, but an error will point you to something that you probably forgot in the tutorial. But as I'm going through this, I'm realizing that if I don't know anything about programming, I don't understand what he's telling me. I don't understand why we've done any of this. Why do I need a variable for the vector? What is all this? This is the perfect time to explain a little bit more about how the engine works. So every single object in Unity is a game object. that is a specific Unity thing. Unity uses C# as its programming language, but it also uses all this specific Unity stuff that allows you to make your game work. Every single game object has a bunch of components that define what it is. By itself, a game object is basically just nothing. So here in the inspector, we have a whole bunch of components attached to our player game object. We have the transform, we have a sprite renderer, we have our new player movement, and we have this material. So every component tells you some information about a game object. The transform component gives you the position, which is your X, Y, and Z coordinate, your rotation, and your scale. Every single Unity game object must have a transform because if it exists in the world, it at least has to have some sort of position. You can't exist without being somewhere. Then there's the sprite renderer. This is just the visual information, and this contains that material that we created, which appears down here, which is the color of our sprite. And then there's the player movement script, which defines the behavior of our game object. When you're creating scripts in Unity, you're essentially just doing some combination of 4 things: detecting input, creating an object, eliminating an object, or changing some information about one of the components. For example, if we're moving the player, we're just programmatically changing its position. You can change the color to some other color in the script. So the rigid body component is the component that adds physics, and Brackeys is using the rigid body component to control the movement on a physics level. So we need this, and I'm going to make sure that my attributes fit his attributes. Dynamic. Do I need to know what any of this means? No. And gravity scale, 0. He did explain that in the tutorial, but I skipped ahead a little bit. I want to demonstrate what you should do if you get confused, or if you get lost along the way. Is this the only way to do movement in Unity? No, absolutely not. You can directly interact with the transform. There you go, I can move. But I can also move through objects. And the reason I can move through objects is because I need one more component to define some information about my player, which is the fact that he needs to collide. So I need a circle collider 2D, and all my walls also need box collider 2D, as do the crates. Now it's gonna work. That's working pretty well. I'm gonna go through the rest of this tutorial and finish implementing this, and then we're gonna talk about exactly what the script does and why. Okay, so I got to a point where everything was almost working, except for some reason my player was not pointing, he's not shooting in the direction that I was pointing. So what gives? I checked the code, I looked at the script, I saw that I wrote everything correctly, and I didn't get an error, so I have a problem. So a few things came to my mind. First of all, I wonder if someone had the same problem as me, and second of all, I wonder if maybe there's something that I missed and maybe that Brackeys didn't explain. First of all, I just checked the comments. I said, what else did you guys run into anything? Oh, if your character is always looking at the center of the screen or some other fixed point. Is that really what my problem was? I'm not sure. Aha, change your camera to orthographic. Okay, well I checked that, and would you look at that? It already is orthographic, so that's not the problem. Okay, something happened at the moment I dragged that main camera to the reference for cam within the player, and then I thought, wait a second, did I drag in the camera? Did I forget to do that? And it turned out, yes, I did forget to do that. I forgot to drag in the camera, and it turns out that experienced game developers also make basic rookie mistakes too. And if none of that worked, I would have literally just looked for a different tutorial. I would have looked up how to rotate a rigid body in Unity 2D. Now I'm narrowing down a specific problem. So before I finish off with this tutorial, I'm going to add a little note for myself. How to debug. I learned a little bit about that now. Check that I wrote the script correctly. If that doesn't work, check the comments. And if that doesn't work, make sure I followed all the steps besides programming. And if that doesn't work, look up another tutorial on that specific issue. If anything else, it just leads you to getting more tools. Alright, so I'm done watching the tutorial. So now let's explain what we actually did. But before I do that, I'm going to show you that I've created this toolbox for myself now. Look, I wrote, okay, I need to know what a variable is. I need to know what a float is. Rigid body components. So we talked about what a component is and what the point of them are and what they do. And there's a few things that I'd be confused about. I don't know why I need 2 different functions, one for input, but whatever. I got a thing working, right? I generally now have another little tool. I have player movement for top-down shooters. I have a tool for shooting. I have a tool for bullets and instantiating stuff. I've learned how to create a new game object in Unity. I've learned how to destroy a game object in Unity. And there's some complicated stuff, like there's vector math for some reason, but maybe I don't need to worry about that because I now know how to rotate something. So in level 1, you're building up your toolbox. In level 2, you're learning more about the details and the specific functionality, why things are the way that they are, how to apply those tools to other new games of your own design. Once you make a few level 1 games and start building up your Unity toolbox, it's worth taking some time to learn programming, learn the basics, learn the logic, learn how to think like a programmer. And I recommend that you check out my free C# course. You don't have to watch it, you can use something else. It's just the thing that I know about because I made it and I think it's pretty good. In level 2, you're also going to start needing to learn about what all these different functions are. You need to know that every single Unity component has a start function that runs at the very, very beginning of the game, and then every single component has an update function that's constantly running every single frame, and you also need to know that fixed update also runs every single frame, but that it's meant for physics. When you're first doing this, you're not going to understand why he made the decisions he made. Why are we storing this variable? Why did we even have to make one? What's a vector 2? So once you've copied a few tutorials, you've seen different instructors make different choices. I'm going to do my best to quickly cover why this script was made the way that it was. So Brackeys wanted to split up his input from his actual execution of the input. Input.getAccessRaw is a Unity function that tells you whether you're pressing W or S or A and D, and then we're storing that value. So every single frame, if I'm not pressing any of my input keys, these movement values are going to be empty. They're going to basically be 0. So then on that same frame, if I then go on to update my movement, the movement is 0, so nothing's going to change. Now on one frame where I am pressing the W or ASD keys, later that same frame, we're going to see that there is a value on movement because we are pressing one of these keys, and so we are going to move that frame. All the code in these functions happens every single frame. If you're doing 60 frames per second, it's actually a lot more than that, but imagine that it's 60 frames per second. It's happening very, very quickly. Now, Brackeys did not teach me in his tutorial how to make enemies, so I'm going to have to look up another tutorial for how to make enemies, but I already have the tools I need to do that. First of all, I know that I need my enemy to move towards the player, and I also have my on-collision enter 2D that he showed me in this bullet script, which I can use to say when the enemy touches the player, I can destroy the player, or I can maybe learn how to restart the level. And if I need to learn how to restart the level, I can just look up how to restart the level in Unity. This is 2017. Let's look for something a bit more recent. 2018. Aha, scenemanager.loadScene, scenemanager.getActiveScene.name. Well, that's a complicated way of doing it, but I guess that's how you do it. We're talking about level 2 game development now. In level 2, you have to be willing to look at your errors and do a little bit more research. Look stuff up. So level 2 programming is apply what you learn the basics of programming, and do research to try to design new features for your new games. You're still keeping it simple, you're not overscoping because you know how hard game development is now. So I'm going to try to create my enemy as a level 2 game developer. I know that my enemy needs a new script. Let's just start with the basics. Let me just do what I know to be true first. I know I need on collider enter 2D because I know that I need to kill the player, except I don't really want to destroy the player. I don't want the player to cease to exist. I want to restart the level. So I'm going to copy this code. It's okay to copy stuff. Now logically, what is this code doing? It's saying when I collide with something, anything, restart the level. We don't really want that. We don't want to restart the level if you hit anything. We want to restart the level if you hit the player. I also learned from my other script here that you can do something called an if statement. But what is the if statement that I'm going to do? I need to do some sort of if collision occurs with the player, then we're going to do this. So how do I find out if the collision occurred with the player? And what the heck is this collision 2D other? This is where my research comes in. Let's see. Okay, let's look at the Unity manual. On collision enter 2D. There's a lot in here. Now, if you've taken some kind of programming course, you know that this is a function and that the function takes in a parameter and that parameter has information on it. You won't know this at level 1, but you'll start to figure this out in level 2. In fact, in level 1, you might see a different tutorial do this exact thing. So let me see what's on this collision 2D parameter. Well, it has a reference to the game object. What do game objects have on them? Well, game objects have tags. I might have seen this in another tutorial, but I'll just tell you about this now. Game objects also have a priority called a tag, and in this tag, you can tag your player. If I go back to the player, I can tag him as player, and now, because I figured out what a collision 2D even has on it, what kind of information it gives me access to, I can check that. And I'm not explaining all of this syntax because the way that you write syntax is going to be explained in whatever programming tutorial or course you take. But to put it simply, other contains a game object, which contains a tag, and we're checking if that tag is player. So let's see if just that works. Well, first of all, I have an error. Scene manager doesn't exist. So again, I'm going to look up this error. The name scene manager doesn't exist in this current context. Let's Google it. There, this is a better example. I'm new to Unity. I'm trying to make a button, and then this guy just explains it to him at the beginning using Unity engine.scenemanagement, and you can always ask a question on Reddit too if you can't figure it out. So now let's run this, and if I touch the enemy, It's not working. Why? If I learn more about OnCollision Enter 2D, I'll realize that I need a collider, just like we've been doing for everything else. Player needs a collider, the bullet needs a collider, the enemy needs a collider as well. Without the component that defines that information about a game object, Unity doesn't know if a game object is supposed to do something or not, so you have to explicitly tell it. And it works. Whenever I touch the enemy, it restarts the scene. So I'm going to leave it up to you to try to figure out how to move the enemy towards the player. We've talked about level 1 game development, we talked about level 1 game design, level 1 art, level 1 programming, you're just copying a tutorial and taking notes. Level 2 programming, you're learning a little bit more about programming with a course. So what's level 2 art? Well, in level 2 art, we have to take things a little bit to the next level, but we're still using our basic shapes. Unity has different render pipelines. All that means is just different systems, different tool sets to render the visuals of your game. We're going to update this project to Universal Render Pipeline, and once again, because you're level 2 now, I'm going to leave it to you to learn what you need to do to update your project to URP. The secret is, just go on YouTube, follow a tutorial. So the advantage of using URP is that it gives us an easy way to do post-processing. This is just going to take our art to the next level. Over here on your main camera, in rendering, select post-processing, create a new empty game object and add a component called volume. Click new under profile, and then we can start adding overrides. One of the things that we're going to mess around with here is bloom, color adjustments, let's do some film grain, let's do some vignette. For bloom, nothing really is going to happen just yet. We can actually completely change the color a little bit. We can change the saturation. Film grain can give us a nice little weird effect. Vignettes are fun. We can crank up the intensity. We can change the smoothness. If we create a new game object, a new sphere or circle, give this guy a new component. You can turn off your post-processing in the scene view if it's distracting. Create a new material. So the shader that we want for this material is Universal Render Pipeline Lit. We're going to turn on a emissive material for this. And here in our color, you see that we have HDR color. We're going to increase that. Now if we turn our post-processing back on and assign this bloom material to this here and go back into our global volume and start messing with our bloom, you'll see that kind of looks like it's lit, and I hate that film grain. It's way too intense. Okay, now we can start to essentially create little lights in our scene. Maybe we want to start directing our player somewhere else. Maybe we're gonna start guiding him down other parts of this level. At level 2, we're also going to be learning about particle effects. So game object, create empty, just going to call it effect. Everything is a component, so let's add a new component, particle system. Okay, and then something's already wrong with it. Why is it pink? Well, no problem. Let's just change the material in renderer. Watch a tutorial on just doing particle effects. But wouldn't it be nice if we could create an explosion with our particle effects when we hit something, and maybe we can add sound effects too. We're going to take what we've learned, we're going to apply the same principles. We know that we can instantiate game objects. If I create another game object that's a sound effect, okay, I can add a component that's a sound. Like I might just look up, like, is there, okay, I'm typing in sound, I don't find anything, but oh, there's this audio source. What's this? You can add an MP3 file or a WAV file in here. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. If you spend just a little bit of time learning how these components work, you're going to be able to add sound effects, particle effects. You're going to make your game feel really cool and have all these fun visuals to it. So that's level 2, post-processing, particle effects, sound effects, music. If you want to know where to get sound effects, freesound.org and Compotech for music. This one's okay. What about music? Sure. I'm going to drag this sound effect into my project. For the music, I'm just going to create a new game object, an empty, call it music. I didn't even spell it right. I'm going to add an audio source. I'm going to add music to it and turn the volume down a little bit. At level 3, you're going to be making a menu with options. You're going to tweak the volume from the main menu. For the explosion, I'm going to turn this into a prefab, and we want it to play on awake. Now for our particle system, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. So this is just a super simple one. I could do a little bit more with this. I'm going to turn this into a prefab like we learned about from our tutorial. I'm going to go into the bullet, which is a prefab. See how our project is getting too bloated? At level 3, organize your project, please. We're going to instantiate a few more things. We're going to instantiate sound. And actually, I'm just going to replace the hit effect with my new particle system. And in fact, I don't even need to destroy it because the script is going to destroy it automatically. I'm going through all this very quickly because this is just a cursory glance. I'm just showing you what you should start to learn about at level 2. We're going to drag our new effect into that effect variable. We're going to drag our sound prefab into the SFX variable. And now let's see what happens when we play this. Look at that, you made a game. If you make this for a game jam just by copying tutorials, even without knowing programming, you're gonna crush the game jam. Allow yourself to be level 1 for a while. Allow yourself to make games by copying tutorials. At level 2, allow yourself to keep it simple, to just take what you've learned in level 1 and just make it just a little bit different. You might think I haven't taught you anything in this video. Well, that's kind of the point. The point is that the learning is in you and what you do and the games that you make and the priorities that you focus on. I just wanted to show you what your priorities should be. I'm just trying to get you out of this analysis paralysis. And I firmly believe that if you do what I suggested in this video, you can make a game in just one weekend. I want you to practice. I want you to try it out. Go join the Yurikame Game Jam. Best of luck with your indie game development. Thank you for watching, and God bless.